Well, howdy there, Screen Freaks! When Full Moon invaded the shelves of local video stores with Hollywood flicks made to blow up the small screen in folks' homes, they had instant success, and none more so than with their flagship title that started it all in '89, Puppet Master. Spun off the killer doll idea explored in Full Moon's previous Empire film, Dolls, Puppet Master is about a sadistic psychic named Neil manipulating a dead man's collection of living puppets to kill his paranormal colleagues. These tiny terrors were such a hit with home audiences, they easily became the mascots of Full Moon, with an ever-growing fan base demanding several sequels, action figures, prop replicas, Halloween costumes, and, of course, comic books. With Full Moon drawing inspiration from Marvel Comics for building a universe of characters share, to creating a clubhouse filled with Full Moon video magazines following most of her flicks, a jump to the funny books was pretty natural. The first publisher to sequentially expand the Full Moon universe was Eternity Comics, who proudly printed the continuing adventures of Puppet Master as their first color comic, followed by other Full Moon properties such as Trancers, Subspecies, Dollman, and Demonic Toys. The first floppy of Puppet Master came hot off the success of the initial movie and hit comic racks in 1990 as a 4-issue miniseries. True to the nature of the film, fans get an eyeful of all the sex, gore, and sophistication we can hope for, while presented with a look into the puppet's undeveloped backstory when the first sequel was still in the works. Written as an origin story, we pick things up after the puppet's first master, Andre Toulon, blows his brains out in '39 to avoid being captured by Nazi spies invading his room at the Bodega Bay Inn in California. A seemingly sound plan, but one Nazi's been chasing Toulon since his escape from Europe and isn't about to go home with nothing to show for it. Still searching for Toulon's elixir recipe for cheating death, this Kraut spies on the hotel, sends in undercover agents, and even visits Cairo to interrogate the merchant who gave Toulon some secret hoodoo tied to the Temple of Anubis in 1919, which would be seen as a flashback in the upcoming Puppet Master 2 at the time. All this comes to a head when the puppets get fed up not having a boss man and force the owner of the Bodega Bay Inn, who turns out to be Toulon's cousin, to help them resurrect Toulon from his backyard grave with their elixir, a reanimation serum made from the brains of everyone they killed in the hotel to protect their secrets. Right out of part 2, right? But this is actually Toulon's first resurrection, with plans for him being reborn in his newest puppet, Torch. So that answers the question for where this mean-looking hombre randomly came from in part 2. But that same Nazi fuck after their secrets ruins everything in the last second, and the puppets rebury Toulon till they dig his rotten ass back up decades later in his unholy creations. A really good read, this is an interesting look at how some of the puppets' history was first fleshed out and applied to future installments like part 2 and especially 3, Toulon's Revenge, with issue 1 containing a lot of flashbacks to Toulon's disastrous run-in with the Nazis. We see how he and his wife Elsa were happily poking fun at Hitler with children's puppet shows, till one brat tattles on him to the Third Reich, who then kill Elsa, making Toulon vow revenge, and yada yada yada, he escapes to America and blows his noodle out. But as much as the movies took from this original backstory, there were some dramatic changes, the biggest being who the puppets are. As you watch the series, you come to find out each puppet is not a brand new life created from nothing, but dead friends and associates Toulon gives a second chance, with their souls transferred to the exciting life of a walking splinter. In the first stab at explaining this in the comics, however, the puppets ain't reborn amigos of Toulon, but Nazi scum he murdered, including the little boy who ratted them out to the Nazis in the first place. That is pretty damn dark to think of Toulon yanking that youngin's pea-brain out to bring Blade to life. Only puppet not a Nazi is Leech Woman, who's really Toulon's dead wife Elsa. Nothing more romantic than carving your wife's brain out and trapping her soul in a leech-belching Barbie doll that kills people with blood-sucking blowjobs. Ain't love grand? Putrid. Polecats. Anyway, solid writing by someone who obviously had love and respect for this new series at the time, and regarding the artwork, the people look a little stiff and several of them look a little too much alike for my taste, but the artist proves he's got a great cinematic eye for layouts and really elevates the writing with his realistic renderings. Recognizing a hit when they see one, Eternity was quick to print one last Puppet Master story before calling it quits, a two-parter called The Children of the Puppet Master that could be bought in one convenient trade. Catching up with Alex, the surviving psychic from the first movie, this first issue in the series is pretty much the comic adaptation of Puppet Master 1, with him dreaming about everything Neil and the puppets did to him and his friends 3 months earlier. Offering nothing you haven't already seen in the movie, we don't start treading new territory until the second issue. The puppets are on the warpath after finding out Toulon's blood descendant Megan, Part 1's last girl and owner of the hotel, is ditching them in the Bodega Bay Inn, leaving the miniature gang with a bad homicidal case of separation anxiety. They first hunt down Alex and kill him in his sleep, despite Part 2 mentioning he was locked away in an asylum, then supposedly used his blood and brain to activate Torch before snatch blocking Megan from some scissoring action with Alex's sister. Is that what you call it when the beast before boobs is being interrupted? Let's see here. Clitorference and beaver damming. Well, you can't say you never learned anything in my show, can you? Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, dogs. So, it turns out the reanimated doggy at the end of the first flick wasn't just a stuffed mutt reanimated for fun, but Megan bringing her evil hubby Neil back through the dog as punishment for all the crap he put her through. Crap we learn about through flashbacks that give us additional details to the Puppet Master timeline. We see Neil proposes to Megan in 1988, cheats on her with a Betty Page knockoff, and then rob her dad's grave in 89 for the final ingredients he needs for resurrecting himself as an immortal. Well, an immortal who can die from knives, drills, and leeches. A death the puppets are more than happy to reenact a second time as they get their wooden mitts on them before reaching their curvaceous targets. But the gals prove lesbos don't follow the same rules regarding sex in a horror story and manage to outwit the puppets in a fire trap. Following these final issues from Eternity, there was a long hiatus before anyone bothered picking up the series for more adventures. By the time Action Lab Comics licensed the series in 2015, it was a much different challenge writing it versus Eternity's run when the series was brand new and unexplored. As opposed to continuing adventures from the first film, Action Lab had to work with the continuity from 11 Puppet Master flicks at the time, each with their own conflicting timelines and story plots that many frustrated fans like me had to bear. Dates were always changing in the timeline, an abundance of added details were mucking up backstories, characters would randomly disappear and reappear, and Puppet Masters would be dropped without any explanation. I always had to think outside the puzzle box and piece together the order I think the films go in, constantly ask myself if the filmmakers even bother fact-checking this shit. That's why with this latest ongoing comic series, we're lucky enough to have writer Sean Gabarine, the saving grace who's not only willing to give us new adventures I want to see made as new Puppet Master movies, but goes the extra mile plugging every plot hole you can think of in the entire film series. In as small of a nutshell as I can make this, the Action Lab comics are all new modern day adventures with a lot of Toulon and the Puppets' enemies from the movies looking to get even. After the Puppets defeated Sutek, the interdimensional ass-faced daddy of their magic in Part 5, his son Anapa steps up to the plate and orchestrates a clever but long-winded plan for reclaiming his pop's stolen magic for resurrection. To pull this off, he brings Neil back from Puppet Master 1, who's got to blow his brains out anytime he wants to hold a powwow with Anapa in its hell dimension or whatever it is, and recruits Camille, that psychic woman turned into the world's scariest party clown in Part 2. Now, she wasn't evil when we last saw her driving the puppets to entertain a loony bin full of youngins, but we never knew what happened to her afterward because her story was completely abandoned in the rest of the movies. Thanks to Sean picking up the pieces, however, we find out the puppets got pissed when Camille refused to leave the youngins' mental hospital and ditched her ass in a closet with a janitor doing Craven knows what with her all these years. The only reason the puppets even get involved with her again is because a youngin named Anthony runs away from the institution on his little wooden legs and asks for their help, saying that she's killing people. Well, feeling responsible, the puppets agree to investigate, but find out the culprit's really just a fucked-in-the-head doctor using Camille's urban legend for a disguise. In the meantime, the puppets do find the real Camille, and they even go as far as to revive her with some juice, but instantly regret it as she proves to be crazier than ever. Like, slasher crazy. Making his butthole of a mouth pucker, Anapa sees something in those bug eyes and recruits Camille as his bride in a surprise twist, later relocating her soul into a replica of Jester she morphs into her own image. So, with the help of these psychic psychos and a new fortune-telling character named Madame Anton, who's eventually turned into a puppet herself, Anapa sets several events in motion that manipulate the puppets every which way imaginable. He first tricks them into giving up their immortality to live as regular people again, and bodies they practically kidnap off the street. You think Toulon might have a bit of a moral dilemma with this, but the guy thinks turning his wife into leech barfing Barbie is fine, so fuck it. Everybody figure yourself and steal some stranger's life. But as soon as they retire from an afterlife as killer action figures, Madame Anton temporarily sticks murderous thrill seekers in their vacant puppets and has them kill Toulon and the gang in their new bodies. The sucker souls meet up in Anapa's dimension, they strike a deal for their freedom by completing a set of tasks, but come to find out they're really just tricked into killing and destroying everything that keeps Anapa from crossing over into their world and breaking shit. With a literal invasion at their doorstep, the puppets try leveling the playing field with a motherfucking golem they stashed in the cemetery behind the hotel, but Anapa and his toy army proved more than up for the challenge. In a surprise turn of events, the puppets' only hope comes from the orphan with the wooden legs, Anthony, who's really the son of Neil from Part 1 and has his own psychic powers. Not that any of that really matters, because Bubble Butt Face here is still defeated by pretty run-of-the-mill puppet weapons like drills, BBs, and electricity. Again, that's defeated, not dead. He's far from done and still cooking up new plots to destroy Toulon and his puppets. In the meantime, Anthony becomes a new puppet master, which really doesn't seem to be all that hard to do. I mean, who won't these ducklings follow, you know? They were obeying some asshole in the first 3 issues because he littered their hotel with enough tribute dolls, which has become a thing when people want to make a wish for the puppet's help. And sure, they kill all his friends so he can have the girl of his dreams, but they turn on him like they do with nearly every master and just do whatever the girl he wants says, which is some dark shit. After the puppets kill the left stick wacko, his dream girl commands him to trap his soul in a keychain trinket so she can roast him in a shoebox. Damn! But anyway, Dream Girl disappears in the wind, and now there's Anthony, who has the ability to mentally bring everybody together in a kind of astral plane in his head where they can have conversations like never before. This is actually a clever way for us to get to know the puppets on a deeper level and avoids a lot of forced flashbacks and expositions. Keeping the continuity from the flicks, Blade is still Dr. Hess, and Tunneler and Pinhead are Joseph and a truck driver named Herman, which carries as much significance as learning Jason Bourne's real name, which is Diddley. Six Shooter just seems to be a party-loving womanizer, and Jester's still the bookworm named Hans, who Toulon identifies in Part 3, which explains a lot for why he's rarely in a fight. The biggest surprise is Torch's soul, which has always been a big question mark. Like I mentioned earlier, it's somewhat suggested Alex's brain was used for activating him in Children of the Puppet Master, but this comic series reveals him to be Toulon and Elsa's son, Eric. Jumping jack-o'-lanterns, what? Am I losing my mind? Was it ever mentioned they had a brat? According to these comics, Toulon had a youngin' who fell in with a Hitler Youth and tried wasting his pop with a flamethrower, but Blade was quicker on the draw. So if Blade was there, that means that this would have had to have happened around the end of Part 3 or sometime during Toulon's escape from Berlin. So what'd he do, smash his little goose stepper's head in and scoop his brains for reviving him later on? If we stick with merging the comics continuity best we can with the movies, I guess Toulon had this boy's essence on standby until the puppets needed backup and brought him back in the Torch puppet, which was originally meant to be Toulon's new body in the Eternity comics? At least other characters ain't this confusing with their origins, like the most mysterious puppet seen for a nanosecond in Part 1, ShredderCon. Always wondering what happened to him, the comics revealed Neil found him with the rest of Toulon's secret stash, but the little guy was too rebellious, so he had to be used for other experimental purposes, like seeing what happens when a puppet's drained of his elixir. He's brought back into the fold later on as a toy soldier in Annapa's magical army, and rejoins the gang after they win the battle. Still a lot of questions for who he is and where he came from, but I'm sure all that will be revealed in time. I love how decades-old questions like ShredderCon's disappearance is so easily explained by Sean, showing me how vague explanations are more than enough to satisfy fans begging for answers. Seriously, with a simple sentence, Sean manages to completely make me forgive glaring oversights within the movie's continuity. In Part 2, the puppets kill Toulon after he hogs all the elixir they need and tells them to fuck off, so why are they so chummy again in Parts 4 and 5? In one panel, Toulon asked for forgiveness, explaining his corpse was so decomposed he was thinking with a rotten brain. Remember Leech Woman's toasty death in Part 2? Just returned without any explanation in Part 6? Toulon simply says that she was rebuilt afterward. By who is a good question, but the fact these guys can cheat death a second time with some refurbishing is good enough for me. Even the history of Sutek's magic and the puppets' elixir of immortality is somewhat made sense of. Now, if you ever paid attention to the logic behind people being brought back and the puppets and how they're maintained, it's almost maddening because the rules change almost every movie. The first flick leaves everything kind of a mystery as to what the puppets are and how they live, but we start getting answers in the second movie, finding out they live off a stew of brain soup they need to cook up about every 50 years to keep operating at full capacity. Part 3 reveals the puppets are actually dead people whose souls are dumped into the walking splinters, but the brain recipe is completely dropped for a simpler magic serum that needs to be mixed with a dead person's blood, then injected into the puppet to bring them back. The whole 50-year lifespan is also abandoned, and the puppets are given the elixir on a much more regular basis like it's supper. Part 4 and 5 are the first sequels to stick with the consistent method behind the puppet's magic started in Part 3, but for some reason Toulon's puppet rebirth as the Capitron requires the whole Frankenstein playset. Maybe this is because they didn't exactly have Toulon's blood and was more about putting his ghost in the puppet? I don't know. Then Part 6 introduced a whole different approach that didn't require any elixir, but some dumb hick carving a wooden puppet to look like a robot tinker toy that sucks his soul from putting too much skillful work into it. I'm not even going to try to understand that. Then Retro Puppet Master comes in and not only changes the rules again, but the timeline too. Part 2 shows Toulon in Cairo in 1912 with a merchant willing to share secrets of reanimation with him, and we assume that's where he learned to be the Puppet Master. Retro kicks that origin in the teeth as this Toulon meets this original thief of Sutek's magic in Paris 1902 and is given the magic with a sharp ring he used with some mumbo-jumbo to transfer souls to new vessels. No elixir, needles, or brains required. And while Charlie Band himself doesn't consider this part of Full Moon's continuity because it was made out of house by the Sci-Fi Channel, Puppet Master vs. Demonic Toys brings his own rules of the series, claiming the magic elixir only works if brewed with the blood of a Toulon, which ain't far-fetched since he is the Puppet Master and we haven't seen the specifics for how that stuff's cooked up anyway. As for the current flicks out during the time of this video, the Puppet Master series seems to have settled on their masters mixing people's blood with the elixir, then shooting it up into a puppet with periodic refills as it wears off. Still a mess regarding what can come back and how big it can be though. Axis Rising claims folks are brought back in small puppets because the serum can't resurrect full-size bodies, but Part 2 contradicts that. You notice how this unholy creation seems to be the part causing the most problems with continuity in the series? The origin flashback, Leech Woman's death, the brain soup recipe, and Toulon's double resurrection that's far from being a small object? And that sucks too, because part 2 is my favorite! Anyway, instead of trying to say one origin happened over the other, Sean comes through again with a clever solution, saying all of it happened. Plugging them plot holes like a pro, he explains the original thief of Sutek's magic did give Toulon the magic in 1902 with the ring, but the merchant in 1912 was another magic man willing to share age-old secrets to help finesse the magic Toulon already had. Sean can technically get away with bending that backstory, I suppose, because that scene is so brief, and we can assume Toulon was tight-lipped about any of his magic around this mysterious heckler, given folks had already tried to kill him for it. As for the brain stew stuff, Sean just has Toulon mention he found a way around that and needing to be a vital ingredient. Could be why all the puppets need the suit more regular now instead of every 50 years, so it makes sense to me. During Action Lab's Puppet Master run, they did manage to get a couple of annuals out, which fans can take or leave because they have no impact on the regular series storyline. Each annual takes place on Halloween and happens on both sides of the original movie. Halloween '88 shows Neil taking the puppets on a slasher test run with a sorority house massacre, and it is busted with sequential eye candy. It's notable because it shows ShredderCon and why he's absent from the first flick after purposely botching Neil's sinister plans for the girls' bodies. The second annual is Halloween 1989 and takes place after the events of the first flick, and is a flyby read because it's mostly a silent comic like that famous G.I. Joe issue with Snake Eyes. It's a teenage prank gone wrong when some jackass in a costume tries scaring Megan in the hotel and ends up getting his ass handed to him by the puppets. As lackluster as it is, the ending's hilarious when the puppets realize the punk's not a real monster and hurry to cover their tracks before Megan finds out. Toward the end of the series, there was a lot of build-up promising some great stories I couldn't wait to read. Anthony loses the puppet's trust after he temporarily goes wacko over bullies and commands them to slaughter everyone in a reopened Bodega Bay Inn. Annapa's gearing up for round 2, an immortal Nazi called the Collector is catching every puppet from the movies for some evil purpose, and Toulon's soul ends up ping-ponging around in limbo because he's deemed too dangerous for heaven and hell. During this time, he's made aware of a cult community exploiting his magic and activates his old retro gang to investigate. Turns out this place has ties to his old assistant Peter, the youngin' who escaped Berlin with Toulon in part 3. Peter was so obsessed with Toulon's work, he managed to collect some of his forgotten puppets, practice what magic he'd learned while being his apprentice, and passed his fanfare down to his own youngins. Peter's grandson Isaac decided to take this love to a whole different level and built a community founded on Puppet Master philosophies with folks willing to trade their flesh for wood and their choice of adult or toy size. But first to benefit from this transition are Isaac's elite guards, who look a little too familiar. Crazy shit, huh? Now, for reasons I don't know, there was a long hiatus after this cliffhanger in issue 20. Poised for the next exciting chapter, I was a little perplexed when an all-new miniseries came out instead titled Puppet Master Curtain Call. Reading the first few pages, I was even more stupefied when characters referenced all these stories I've been waiting on as old news. The Collector was the newest Puppet Master, and the entire cult storyline was summed up in one panel with Toulon saying it ended badly for them. Hold your horses! Did I miss something? After a little digging, I found that Action Lab Comics did jump from issue 20 to Curtain Call, and Sean's letter to the readers in the back helped put 2 and 2 together. Action Labs had only licensed the Puppet Master franchise for 3 years, and time had run out. Without enough months left to finish what I bet were going to be the best Puppet Master stories yet, Sean had to wrap up his playtime with Charlie Band's toys in a 3-part swan song. So even though we were denied the stories with the Cult and the Collector, Sean more than made up for it with these final issues packing in as much story and gore as we could wish for. A little over a year story-wise since the events of issue 20, Annap is still on the warpath and continues to grow his army of small soldiers. He sticks Peter's grandson Isaac into the original Mephisto puppet and takes back control of Toulon's puppets from the Collector, who he remakes as a hodgepodge monstrosity called the Collection. Annapa then declares a Bodega Bay Inn ground zero for his own version of the apocalypse, at which point Anthony and Toulon show up and regain control of the puppets for a last stand, giving us the most epically intense battle of the entire Puppet Master franchise. Sweet carnage, if I'm lying, I'm living, because these handful of comics are just cover-to-cover brawl fest among our favorite characters new and old. And if everyone going down like the first act of the Transformers movie wasn't enough, Sean ups the ante with Annapa trying to possess Anthony as his new vessel on Earth with a hell of a psychedelic battle in the poor youngin's head. With the Decapitron body finally free of Annapa, Toulon jumps on that sucker in a heartbeat and busts out the big head, an Egyptian noggin armed with a soul-erasing crystal. After wiping out Annapa's minions, Toulon turns this weapon to Hocus' destruction on Assface and weakens him enough to finally be finished off with a blow from a god-killing knife that traps him within Anthony's psyche. With the world safe again and everything returning back to normal, the puppets are rebuilt like always, but the gang decides to finally move on with their afterlives and bid Anthony one last adios. In the final couple of pages, Anthony buries Toulon's trunk for safekeeping. And Blade stays behind in case the puppets are ever needed for another monster brawl. Damn! Sean did what Mortal Kombat, Annihilation, and 90s Batman films couldn't do and successfully packed a whole toy line worth of characters into one epic story with a satisfying ending. With fluid artwork, monsters, gore, but no nudity other than a side boob in one issue, and a writer who not only gives a shit but knows what he's doing, this was the best horror movie tie-in comic on the shelf at the time it was published. So there you have it, every Puppet Master comic from the very beginning. Made by fans for fans. It wouldn't hurt to see the movies to understand who everyone is and have a greater appreciation for all the Easter eggs, but if you got that under your belt, then you're all set for enjoying a collection of comics that's one of the few to not only capture the spirit of the flicks we enjoy watching, but makes you wish there were sequels in the works for small screen debuts. Lucky for us, while Sean reluctantly had to put the toys back in the box at Action Lab, Charlie Band invited him over to play with him some more at Full Moon's first ever in-house comic publication, Full Moon Comics. The premiere issue kicking off this first for Full Moon is a tour de slaughter of Full Moon's greatest creations as Dollman, the 13-inch confident attitude, makes it his mission to destroy all evil by blowing every beast, freak, and twisted toy off the face of the earth in a series that can only be called Dollman Kills the Full Moon Universe. After seeing Gavin throw the puppets against all kinds of crazy forces in the Action Lab run, we can't wait to see how well they fare against an alien on a murder spree with an explosive handgun. And hey, Screaming Soup's got some artwork in these issues, so you definitely need to start picking this exciting series up. But then again, what do I know? I like Killer Tomato movies. See you later, Screen Freaks! Now, folks watching these videos have been asking me, "Hey Dead West, where can I find these celluloid comics you're always spitting about?" Well, because so much of this came out forever ago, you just gotta hunt these back issues of our favorite horror movies down. The best go-tos I suggest right off the bat are eBay, Amazon, and iOffer. And when those don't pan out, try Googling online comic book retailers, check out the publisher's website and see if they still have copies of what you're looking for. And I would strongly suggest Mile High Comics, where I found most of my collection. They haven't failed me yet, and if you join their mailing list, they're always sending folks discount codes that knock a big chunk off the price of your total purchase. Happy hunting, Screen Freaks! Well, howdy there, Scream Freaks! Well, thank you kindly for watching, and help yourself to more servings of Screaming Sue by visiting our site at screamingsue.com. You can read our weekly updates, character bios, and interviews, catch up on past episodes, browse our store, and drool over the Howlin' Hottie of the Week. If you want to scream at us, just holler at screamingsoup@gmail.com, and don't forget to stalk us through social media, conveniently linked at the top of the site.